Hello to everyone from wherever you might be joining. Can I actually get a show of hands? Are most people from the UK? Oh, there we go. Lots of hands there. Very good. Very good. From the US? Vic, I see your hand up there. Very good. Unless it's still up for the UK.
It's for the UK, yes.
It's for the UK. Okay, that's fine. That's totally fine. Well, thank you so much to everyone for joining. We're super, super excited on behalf of Tech Interview Coaching and Adelina to be hosting this webinar today, which the topic of which is, as you guys all know, and if it's not the right topic, then you've joined the wrong webinar, how to become a CTO. We're super, super excited to have Adelina Chalmers. We'll be talking and giving an intro on her in a little bit. But this topic is obviously of big importance. The tech industry has been faltering a little bit as of late since the pandemic. And a lot of people are in that spot where they're wanting to take that next step to become a CTO, and they're looking for guidance on how to do that, or people already have the experience and are trying to figure out what the next step is and how to move on to a new CTO role, which is where Adelina comes in, because she's essentially the master, the pro of this topic. I want to talk a little bit about Tech Interview Coaching. I'm one of the co-founders of Tech Interview Coaching. Very, very excited to be here. I'm also the CMO and a behavioral coach on the Tech Interview Coaching team. We're here to help professionals like you land dream roles in tech. And whether it's through interview coaching, polishing up your resume, giving you a LinkedIn makeover, we're all about setting you up for success. So we're sort of this team that's in your corner while you're sort of maneuvering through the difficult tech job market right now, tech and non-tech as well. We've also expanded into career advancement coaching, because we know it's not just about landing a job, it's also about taking that next step within your career and how to go about that. And we're here to support you every step along the way. And this brings me to Adelina. Adelina has also joined on the call. Very excited to have her, as I had mentioned. Adelina is a guest lecturer in Cambridge. I'm reading because I want to make sure that I'm not getting any of this wrong. She's got a long resume. She's an expert in helping engineers step into CTO roles by bridging technical expertise with leadership and communicational skills. And she has worked with top companies and countless engineers, helping them inspire teams, influence stakeholders, and navigate the challenges of leadership in tech, often saving them a lot of money in the process as well. So you guys are in the right place. Adelina was nominated on Computer Weekly's Top Influencing Women in IT in 2021 and 2022. And what makes Adelina stand out is her ability to demystify, what it takes to become a successful CTO. She doesn't just focus on the technical skills. It's about helping leaders step into a role that drives innovation, inspires teams, and delivers business value as well. She's known for her unabashedly honest and actionable advice, real-world insights, and her knack for helping leaders unlock their full potential. And having said that, I would love to give Adelina the opportunity to talk a little bit about herself as well. If I've missed anything, Adelina, please feel free to highlight that. As I said, we're all really excited to have you on the call. And I'd also love for you to touch base on what brought on the name of Geek Whisperer. I think that's sort of an obvious question. I'm really intrigued by that.
Okay. First of all, I cringe horribly every time someone reads my bio or talks about my background. Whenever I do my guest lectures at Oxford or Cambridge, I always say to people, do you care, or should we just crack on with work? So every time someone goes to my background, I just cringe horribly. But thank you for that, Hande. I don't think you've missed anything in particular. I just have a passion for helping hyper smart scientists and engineers become really good executives, because often they lack the skills to thrive in an executive environment, and often they become bitter because of it, and often they don't know what happened. They don't even realize what happened. And I'm very, very keen to help them succeed. I'm autistic myself. My mother is a scientist. All of my kind of friends are geeks. So as you can probably tell, I'm someone who's extremely passionate about this, but I really cringe talking about myself. I always like to focus on the people that I'm helping. So maybe should we crack on with some real questions or real stuff? Let's talk about the real stuff rather than about me, which is 6 minutes into the call. I far too long for me to carry on talking about me. So let's work on some things that people care about.
I know there are a lot of people really excited to ask you questions. I guess the first question that I have is, with this being the topic of how to become a CTO, I think a lot of people would be very angry if I didn't ask you that overarching question of how do you become a CTO? Obviously, your answer is probably going to depend on whether what stage in life you're in. But if you could just give your insights on this topic.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll be super short with this as much as I can, and then I'd prefer to hear your questions as well, like see what people want to know. But essentially, how do I become a CTO is an insanely open-ended question, because it's like saying, how do I go to Las Vegas? And it's like, well, where in the world are you starting off? Are you starting in London? Are you starting in Bulgaria? Are you starting in Pakistan? Like, how you get to Las Vegas depends massively on where you are right now. And I did a Udemy course, which is, I don't know, like £12 or something. I think Udemy priced it at. I have no control over the pricing they put. I did a Udemy course where I explain the 5 most common ways I have seen out of the hundreds of CTOs I've worked with become a CTO. How did they become a CTO? And I explained literally the 5 most common things people became CTOs in under 3 years. And so it depends on where you are and how quickly you want to become a CTO. But true CTOs, executive CTOs, rather than just someone with a CTO job title, are extremely, extremely few. There are very, very small numbers. Out of all the people you'll see on LinkedIn with a CTO job title, I can tell you at least 80% of them are not a true CTO. And I'm going to leave it at that for now. Happy to explore and be asked lots of questions.
What would make you say that? What do you mean by that?
What do I mean by, if you were
80%.
to look at, So a lot of people, and if you look at the 5 examples I gave on this Udemy course, a lot of people became CTO. They're accidental CTOs. They became CTO because they were a co-founder, because they were lucky to be the kind of the right person, the right techie person at the right time in the right place. Like, for example, when I work with Cambridge University, a lot of scientists and engineers from Cambridge become CTOs. But that's just because they were the expert who created some sort of technology that the university thought they could commercialize. So they have the job title CTO. Yesterday, if you look on LinkedIn, their job title was research assistant or postdoc or something like that, or software developer, or maybe team lead. But very rarely do you see a proper track record career of advancement from engineer to management to executive, which is what the CTO role is. It's an executive role.
Very interesting.
I'll keep my answers very brief, as much as I can, and then obviously feel free to ask clarifying questions.
No, I guess people will have to take the Udemy course to get more insight. This is a very interesting topic, I think, to hone in on. It seems like you're saying that a lot of it is the right place, right time, lack of better options, and I think what I'm hearing from what you're saying is they may be lacking a lot of the soft skills. They may have the technical know-how because they set up the technology and they were one of the founders, but they may lack the soft skills in transitioning into a CTO.
Yes, that's true. I don't need people to do the Udemy course. I can explain very briefly what the 5 ways were, if it would be helpful to people in the audience. This is not a pitch to buy my Udemy course, because to be honest with you, it's not I only made it because I want to see what it's like to create a course, but I have no control over Udemy. And I'll tell you what they are. I mean, obviously there's more detail than this, but in the course itself. But for example, like I said earlier, one of them is becoming a startup founder. And in the course, I explain in more depth, how people do that, other than spinning out of Cambridge University. The other one is, if you are in a company that, as an engineer, that's, a bigger company, then essentially by volunteering to do things and constantly saying to your boss, I feel I have gaps. I want to become a CTO. I want to become a manager. My career goal is that in 10 years, I want to become a CTO. Therefore, I'd like to plot with you the map. And so kind of expressing that to the manager, but also kind of volunteering to do things so you can learn the skills of what it's like to be in charge, essentially. And then ultimately you discover, and if you look actually, for example, the last ARM CTO, ARM Holdings, the microchip company, their last CTO was an engineer who was an engineer at ARM 30 years ago. So he's kind of someone who just progressed through the business. Another way I've seen people become a CTO is they were one of the first 5 employees of a company. And when the company grew beyond a certain stage and there was fights between the original CTO and the rest of the founding team or the investors, they fired the CTO and they promoted the longest standing engineer. So that's another accidental CTO, how it became. Tech consulting. So another CTO was actually interviewed on the Udemy course. He explains how he got the CTO role in the company he's at now, Pro Writing Aid, by doing consulting. And then the other way to become a CTO is to be really well networked. The amount of CTOs I know who are not the best technically in the world, but they're fantastic networkers. They go to PE fund events, they go to venture fund events, they go to pitching events, they go to university events, because at university events, they're always looking for industry experts. And they have CTO jobs lined up one after the other because of their network and who they know rather than what they know. Anyway, that's the 5 ways to give you some ideas.
Amazing. Thank you for giving that overview. But it's certainly a big topic, and it seems like a very interesting course to look into. In fact, all of your videos have been very insightful about this topic. I want to ask a question from the audience. This is from David, and he's asking, what do you think the standard pitfalls are for CTO types when interacting with C-team execs? This is a good question.
Excellent question, David. And I was actually talking about this with a CTO in a hedge fund just before this call. So there's top 3 areas. Actually, there's 5, but let's just talk about the top 3 first. One of the biggest mistakes that CTOs make when talking to execs is thinking that throwing technical jargon at them will impress them. Execs really dislike technical jargon. It makes them feel out of control. It makes them feel they don't understand. It makes them feel engineering is a black box and opaque, which makes them feel threatened, which means they don't trust the CTO. So actually has the opposite effect. Whilst with engineers, that technical detail might come across as, I have higher status than you because I have higher knowledge. With execs, that has the opposite effect. So that's kind of lack of communication skills with execs. The other 2 things that really, really make a CTO lose credibility with the rest of the exec or the board are lack of political acumen. They have no idea, for example, how to give bad news to the board. And usually when the CTO is called into the boardroom, unless they're a board member, they're called to give bad news. But the way they give bad news is in such a hopeless manner that the board loses all faith in the CTO. And then the third one, I would say, is complete and utter lack of awareness and knowledge of the market that the company they work for operates in. For example, if you work in robotics, you want to read the Financial Times, you want to look at robotics companies and how are they performing in the market, what mistakes are they making. There's a brilliant article about the Ocado CTO and what mistakes he admits that the company made, or the CEO admits the company made when it comes to technology strategy they had. Knowing how other companies who are market leaders in your field are mistakes they've made, you can learn from that and be a proactive person to the board rather than a reactive CTO who just reacts when stuff comes up rather than proactively saying to the board, we can save this risk or we can de-risk the company by doing X, Y, and Z. Instead of once the risk has happened going, oh yeah, we're probably going to have to fix this. I'm going to stop there.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, I have a load of questions, but I'd still like to leave it to the audience to continue to ask whatever may be on their minds.
Do you have any follow-up questions, perhaps?
To that one, I do have a question about emotional intelligence. I think emotional intelligence or the emotional quotient is something that often gets overlooked in interviewing processes, whether technical or non-technical. In my line of work as a behavioral coach, I often find there's a lot of room for growth when I'm coaching somebody. I think in the technical field, unfortunately, just by sheer virtue of it being technical, it's potentially something that is more missing, or maybe you can shed some light onto that. How is that something that we can develop or hone in on as tech leaders?
So, sorry, do you mean, how is EQ something that we can develop as tech leaders? Is that the question?
In ourselves and also within our team, yes.
So, from my perspective, emotional intelligence has two core aspects. One of them is internal, i.e., introspection, understanding yourself, understanding what triggers you, understanding why you get defensive when someone asks you difficult questions about the technology you created, for example. Understanding your emotions, like what makes you feel scared, what makes you feel threatened, why do you respond defensively, why do you have to shout? And then the other one is external. So, for example, understanding how do other people perceive you? So for example, I'm quite aware that I'm very assertive, very loud, very confident. That can make some people feel intimidated by me. So in the right context, I often kind of make jokes about myself and minimize myself so people don't feel intimidated by me, or share something vulnerable. So they're
Humility.
Yeah, but I really dislike people feeling intimidated, and I have been told many times people find me intimidating, right? But if I had no empathy or emotional intelligence, I would just I'm just myself. Well, yeah, but we are who we are in connection to other people. There is a limit, there is a kind of limit through which, no matter what you do, people always feel offended, and you're normally a minority. But if you have a bit of self-awareness, it's much more helpful to understand what kind of mitigating things can you put in place to minimize the negative impact of what you do on other people. And empathy, it's not sympathy. Sympathy is, oh, poor you, you're real. Oh, poor you. Exactly. Sorry about that. Empathy is, I know what that feels like, or I can imagine what that feels like. So it's not like, oh, poor you, I'm over here, you're over there. Empathy, I think, is best experienced and felt when you've been through something similar. I won't go too much. If you want, I can answer clarifying questions, but I don't want to bang on and on about things.
No,
it gets very boring when one person
It's
talks.
true. People often don't understand the difference between empathy and sympathy, and empathy is a skill that I think often gets overlooked, as I had mentioned. You're absolutely right. It's the ability to put yourself into someone else's shoes. I want to touch on a topic. I haven't seen any additional questions, by the way. I'm going to start picking on everyone that's got their video on, even if you're muted, to prompt you to ask a question. This is your opportunity to ask Adelina a question directly. But something else that I wanted to ask you about is women in CTO roles, or just women in tech in general. Obviously, we're underrepresented. I was just looking at the participant list, and about 20% of the participants are female. And that's slightly less than, I think, the general representation of a tech organization. My question to you is, I'd read that, they start off at about 30% or so representation within tech organizations. But as time goes on and there's progression, you see less representation of women. And that's due to the circumstances when it comes to, being a mother, like parentship, etc. How, if you are a CTO, male or female, how can you promote more females to level up in your organization and to be a good role model?
I'm going to say something that doesn't sound, I think, very politically correct. And I'm going to actually start with the side. So back in 2020, when they made the Equality Act legislation in the UK, I was actually part of the steering group that made the legal guidance and gave feedback before the law was decided on if they should have positive discrimination. And positive discrimination is if you have a man and a woman with the same skills and experience, should it be legal was the question at the time. Should it be legal for you to appoint a woman just on the basis that you want positive discrimination? You want, to have more diversity in the team. And at the time, we all recommended no, because then it would be a kind of a token, this is the token CTO woman, right? So for me, how you can promote women is, frankly, genuinely, the conversation needs to start a lot sooner than by the time they ended up in a job. Because in Britain in particular, if you look at other countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, whatever, there's a lot of women in STEM. There's a lot of women who work in science, technology, engineering, mathematics. In Romania and all those kind of countries, they're fantastic at that. But in Britain, we're not. In Britain, there's not a lot of encouragement for women to go into STEM subjects at university. So my genuine proper response is actually we need to start with the education side. But let's say if you're in a company, right? I think often if there's a male-dominated environment, people don't realize, and there's no maliciousness about this, okay? But they don't realize they have their little cliques. Just like, when people get business because they go golfing with the guys. Well, if the woman doesn't go golfing, then she's out of that and she never gets to hear about the business opportunities. So it's about maybe opening up business opportunities for them to succeed. But this involves you being aware of your biases, have that empathy, being aware and constantly asking feedback from the team to see if people who are women or maybe disabled or whatever, they feel they're outside of the clique. And I'd say, to me, that's the core of it. It's not specifically about the woman, because there's nothing wrong with her, right? There's nothing wrong with her ability to be a CTO. In fact, actually, a lot of women are phenomenally good CTOs when they are CTOs, because they have empathy skills and leadership and communication skills usually. Don't want to kind of generalize too much. But a lot of women, I was just talking to a PE fund CTO earlier, and he was saying that, they promoted the woman to a CTO in one of the companies they have. And she's brilliant because she's great at communication skills, great at admitting she doesn't know stuff. So I suppose how you make sure you promote women, frankly, make sure that they are part of the crucial conversations, just like, frankly, anyone else should be. It's more not about promoting women specifically, but about making sure they're included in the conversation. That's my genuine advice. But I think we have some questions, haven't we? In the meantime,
we do.
Some questions. So I'll stop talking so we can hear those.
Amazing. Thank you, Adelina. You had mentioned that a CTO can lose credibility when delivering bad news to the board. Yes. What are the key do's and don'ts for effectively delivering bad news in a way that maintains trust and credibility?
Yeah, great question. Yeah. Who asked that question, if I'm allowed to know?
Yara.
Hello. Okay.
Hi, Yara.
I don't see her on the call, but maybe that's just because it's... excellent question. So, do's and don'ts. The core one, if you remember nothing but... This is the core one. So one of the ways CTOs give bad news to the board that makes them, hello Yara, that makes them lose credibility is they kind of dramatize it. So for example, they say, we've had the cybersecurity breach. It means that we weren't able to operate for 5 days or 2 days, whatever the disaster is. And then they don't show the board what they've done to stop it, what they're planning to do for this to never happen again. There's no action plan. They're just kind of like, here's some bad news. Tough, innit? Well, no. The board wants a guy or a gal who's really on the ball, owns the stuff that happened, owns the mistakes. I wasn't good enough at driving this. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. Owns that stuff and then says, but this is what I've done so far. This is what I'm going to do going forward. In fact, in some industries like financial industry, when there is a breach, for example, security breach, there's a standard way that you have to report what's happened. And it's within 24 hours to the authority, to their regulators. So within 24 hours, within 72 hours, and with 30 days. If a CTO followed that with their own board, that'd be fine, because that's the good practice. That's what good practice looks like. So if I'd say do's and don'ts, don't just tell them there's a problem. Tell them there's a problem, So tell them there's a problem, tell them how you've stopped the problem or how you're planning to stop it, and tell them how you're going to do what they're going to do to prevent it happening again and secure everything else as well. So it's really showing proactivity rather than reactivity.
That makes sense. I think it's from my time at Amazon, I remember that that was unacceptable just to share bad news. You were expected to come up with a backup solution, a 1-pager, a 3-pager, along with the bad news. So it's almost like, well, I have bad news, but good news for you as well. You're never just allowed to share the bad news. Makes total sense. Another question that we had is, how do you see the role of CTO changing with the advancement of technology? I guess this can be asked about anything, even if you're a professional chef, right? How do you see the role evolving?
So I actually wrote a newsletter article about this on my LinkedIn newsletter back in December. The CTO role will change drastically because obviously AI will know more about the technical side of things, frankly, than any CTO can ever remember. However, what AI cannot do on a CTO's behalf is the credibility side, is the communication side, is the leadership side, is building credibility with the board, is making the board feel safe and secure. AI can't do that. So the soft skills, the business acumen, the political acumen, the strategic acumen skills of a CTO will only become more and more important as time goes on and as AI is developing and learning the technical side of the CTO job. In fact, if you've noticed, when you ask AI to tell you the answer to a technical question or to do some code for you, it does it perfectly. If you're pretty damn well. If you ask it a soft question, it often gets it wrong and it hallucinates. It's because it's not a human and he hasn't learned those things yet, and hopefully it never will. If they do, we're pretty doomed in my book. But right now we're safe with that one.
What do you mean by hallucinates? Could you clarify?
Well, it just, AI, sometimes if you ask it the question and it doesn't know the answer, it creates a question out of thin air and even creates its own quotations for research that doesn't even exist.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I have another question from Jad. Thank you, Jad. Is age taken into consideration for CTO roles? Is being too young a consideration for becoming a CTO? Another good question.
Absolutely excellent question, but I think I want to come back to my point about, are we talking about the true real CTO? Because as I said, you can become a CTO in under 3 years by literally just, I've known CTOs who are 25 years old. I'm sorry, but they were not.
You're right. For all intents and purposes, let's assume that we're talking about an
executive CTO.
Exactly.
I think, to be honest, all of the executive CTOs I've met, they're in their mid-40s. Minimum, because you need at least 20 years experience in industry to understand industry trends, people, leadership, board effectiveness, strategy, political acumen, business acumen. You need all that industry experience and life experience to be able to be a competent executive CTO rather than a CTO in title.
How many years of experience do you on average require for a mid-sized company? What have you seen?
I'd say about minimum 10 years. However, you have to remember as well that some people officially have 10 years experience on their CV, but they don't have 10 years experience. They have 10 1-year experiences. And they are, again, even on paper, they look 10 years experience CTO, and they have total job title for 10 years. I've been CTO for the last 10 years. No, you haven't. You've been up someone with a CTO job title for the last 10 years. But you've only had the CTO, the first year experience as being as maybe the startup CTO, and then the rest of them, they've been the copy-paste of that. So actually, you're worse than someone who's just starting out and gradually going through the layers to advance to an executive role, because you haven't learned much new at all, and you haven't learned the right skills to become an executive CTO.
Right. Another good question from Alexei. What are the main skills to develop as a good executive, and how do you start developing them, starting with software engineer level?
Yes. So when you're a software engineer, you are, from the company perspective, and I don't mean this in any demeaning way, but you are to them a factory worker. You're someone who does individual work. You're a piecemeal person. The way you get out of that is always ask the difficult questions when you have executives in the room. Like asking questions, and I don't mean your own CTO, because they might see you as a threat sometimes, although obviously, again, learning political acumen, understanding how your CTO is perceived by the board is quite an interesting one for an engineer. But essentially becoming curious, for example, with your managers, how is what we're working on contributing to the company sales? Are you actually selling the stuff we've been working on, the feature we've been working on, or is it just something the company's hoping will help them be differentiated in the marketplace? So becoming curious, one engineer said to me, he became CTO, and now he's a serial CTO. He said to me, he became CTO because he always became curious about the business. He always wanted to understand what the business was doing outside of his coding. And essentially developing, I said earlier, one of the ways to become a CTO in a bigger company is to volunteer. So not only ask questions, like, for example, when you have all hands with the CEO and they give you the strategy or the report or whatever, what's happening, kind of asking the question of how the project I'm working on, this department or this project, can anyone help me understand how much of the company revenue is generated by my department in terms of sales? So understanding the impact of engineering on other departments in the smallest ways possible, by asking the product manager of maybe another department for coffee to understand what they're working on and how's that related to what you're working on, all the way up to these town hall meetings or all hands meetings, asking the CEO the difficult questions of how, or asking the CEO, the COO, or the VP of engineering, the CTO, whatever, but understanding how is your team contributing to the company, and also how can your team be better at serving the company and its business objectives. If you start asking questions like that, people will be like, wow, this guy is different. Like, this engineer has leadership potential. In the right companies. In the wrong companies, they'll see there is a threat. And believe me, you do not want to become an executive in those companies. I'll go stop there.
Thank you. Thanks, Adelina. We have another question, and I'm trying to make sure that we're only going for questions from people that haven't asked yet. If you aim to advance up the levels of a company structure, what are intermediary leadership positions, other positions to take on to get to a CTO level?
Excellent question. Right. So the executive CTOs that are actually good at their jobs and they have a constant stream of job offers, regardless of how tough the market is, they started as an engineer. And again, they became very curious very quickly about sales. They very quickly wanted to understand, how's the company making money? How's my work contributing to the company making money? Who are we selling to? Why are we selling to them? How are we making profit? Where's our profit margins going? So they was literally engineer, maybe senior engineer, maybe team lead. But often you see them going into director of commercial. And it's like, whoa, how did you get from that to that? Sometimes they become director of commercial at a different company. But because they were so curious about product, about the other departments, they skip literally. They understand this company, especially if they work in a big corporate that has a brand name. You go, well, I was a team lead in this company, but actually I understood how product works and how all of these things work. So then in a slightly smaller company in the same industry, they get a bigger job title. But often you can see people, if you look at the Confused.com CTO, which I interviewed on my Udemy course, and you can see his interview on that course. The Confused.com CTO was an engineer, but he was not the best engineer. However, he was curious about the other departments and how engineering was impacting their ability to deliver. So I can't remember his exact job titles, but essentially what you do is you become an engineer and then you become a team lead, engineering manager, head of infrastructure, head of operations, head of engineering sometimes. And then from that, you can go to VP of engineering and then to CTO. And that's kind of often the track people get, or VP of innovation is another one in bigger companies. But that's kind of the track. I've actually created a little which I did share probably last year on LinkedIn. I shared a post with all the job titles I've seen CTOs have all the way up to CTO. But usually they are engineer, senior software engineer, team lead, engineering manager, director of engineering, head of engineering, vice president, and senior vice president, and then CTO, if you want a linear kind of track.
It's quite a few. That makes sense. And we have another question from Dominica. Are there any learning resources that you would recommend to develop the right skills? Are university qualifications useful when transitioning from IC to early manager to CTO? Something along the lines of an MBA or business qualifications?
Very good question. I have to be careful what I say here because obviously I guest lecture
Of course.
both at Oxford and Cambridge. And I've met a lot of people who come to especially the business courses at Oxford and Cambridge who are there because they want a promotion to CTO. And that's why they attend, for example, the CTO program at Cambridge or the AI program at Oxford, etc. I mean, what those kind of courses give you, to be honest with you, not really the skills, but they give you a network. And they give you kind of a brand. When I asked people, why are you coming to this course? It's really expensive. They pay £40,000 a year. And I go, why are you coming to this course? And they go, because of the brand, Oxford or Cambridge, I want that on my CV, and because of the network I have access to. And I'm here because I want a better job. To me, that's a very expensive way to get a better job. 40 grand, 50 grand, 100 grand spent on. It's just a network, really. But actually, you can build a lot of that network by literally networking in the right places, like going to these fancy pitching events, or the events, open events, Oxford and Cambridge both organize, for people to. They have matchmaking events. People don't even know this, but Oxford and Cambridge University have these matchmaking events between their scale ups and people from industry, people who've worked in industry. And they're more experienced than their academics. So it's a tricky one for me to answer. This is why actually I'm personally working in partnership with Oxford to develop some online courses that are actually truly, genuinely helping you build some skills rather than just a network. But if you sign up on my mailing list, I will tell you when those things are coming out. I can put the link in the chat if you want. Let me know at the end to the link to that, so you can find out about my when I release these things, because it's all happening behind the scenes. It's not public yet.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm going to be sharing some links at the end, and Adelina, it would be great if you could share yours as well so people can sign up. You were talking about sort of gate crashing events, right? Oxford, Cambridge, et cetera, to have access to those networks.
Yeah.
I do wonder, though, being an alum of, if I had graduated from one of those programs, and what do you think the perception is of those people when someone from the outside sort of comes in and, is trying to establish a connection and a relationship? Like, what is the best way of sort of crashing those events and establishing a rapport?
It's actually going to them regularly. So, when I started my business 13 years ago, I didn't work in tech. I worked in human rights. Like you heard earlier, I used to be part of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. I was invited, I was like a specialist kind of advisor there. I used to work in human rights. I worked for the police, I wasn't working in tech. I only switched to working in tech because I realized whilst doing my human rights work that tech companies have a much bigger impact on people's quality of life than governments do. I mean, look at Elon Musk right now, and what he's trying to do in the world. And this guy, I'd say, has a lot more impact on people's quality of life than we imagine. And governments, often they're too bureaucratic, they're too slow. Whilst I employ you, I dictate how you lead your life. And this is why I decided to actually shift to tech. And I've now worked longer in tech than I worked in human rights. So for me, the thing that opened the doors for me, and I had to open every single door one by one, right? But I was going to the Cambridge University events day in, day out. Whatever event it was, if I could get in through the door, I was going there. And I was going there early so I can meet all the people who are organizing it, so I can speak to them, so they can invite me to stuff. How do you think I ended up a guest lecturer at Cambridge? It was not because I have a Cambridge degree, because I don't. In fact, by Cambridge standards, I don't even have a degree. I'm going to stop there, but happy to answer clarifying questions if need be.
So resilience and consistency seems to be
consistency.
key.
Like if they see you there day in, day out, they go, wow, this person is really consistent,
Yeah.
And you know, like when you make connections, follow up. You say, oh, I'd love to catch you over coffee and find out what sort of companies you've invested in lately. Right. Oh, okay, sure. Why are you interested? Because I want to become a CTO one day, but I'm interested in business. Say that. Most investors will be very interested to hear it because they know CTOs don't have an interest in business and commercial.
It's amazing how much can be done when you just invite people out for a coffee, right?
Yeah, and obviously, don't be offended if they say no. I mean, that's the other thing. Sometimes you're just they're not, they don't have an interest, they're not ready yet, and that's fine too. Just, it's just about moving on, trying the next person, It doesn't matter. I mean, the amount of no's I got, if I got offended by them, I wouldn't be here today.
Thick skin is also something that is needed, I guess, in anything that you do.
Do you know, one vice president of sales at ARM said to me once, brilliant woman, she said to me, no means not now. It never means never. Because when if context changes, you might find they start looking for you. And that's spot on.
Right. Good advice. Alexi asks, what's your opinion on the fractional CTO roles?
I need a bit more context to that question because I could go into about 5 different directions on it. But I will say something that will sound very harsh. There are a lot of fractional CTOs in the marketplace at the moment. And a lot of them are fractional, not all of them, but a good chunk of them are fractional CTOs because they can't find a CTO job. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that tells me that they don't have business and commercial skills because a business and commercial acumen CTO will always have jobs on the go, will always have invitations, will always have opportunities open to them. I'm telling you because I've worked with a few CTOs who are CTOs in companies from 2,000 people to 200,000 people. These people are never short of a job. They always have 5 offers on the table at pretty much any point. And that's because they're known in their industry. They have the things I mentioned earlier, political acumen, business acumen, strategic acumen, commercial skills.
Totally agree. Sorry, I was just going through the notes. There seems to be a healthy discussion about the value of an MBA since you touched on it. Sure. As you had said, it's a subjective matter. It's what you make of it. And it's about network building. As someone who has an MBA myself, I agree with a lot of the points that are being made here. But as you had said, it really depends on what you make out of it, right? You don't have to go to a top tier MBA program to be able to access these amazing networks. And there's also LinkedIn right now. So that's certainly some food for thought. I would like to call out a couple of the other people that are on the call and that haven't contributed yet. I see Anoop, your camera is on. I had said at the beginning that if your video is on, I may call out on you. And Angelos, we haven't heard from you. What's going on, Angelos? I have certainly more questions that I would love to ask you. There is another question. Here we go.
I don't have a question if you're referring to me.
There's only one Angelos on the call.
I just wanted to say hi.
Right okay, well.
Thank you, Angelos.
Thank you so much, Angelos.
I've got a couple of questions, if I may. Sorry.
I just saw them, Reese. I apologize. You just resurfaced them. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm full of cold. That's why I kind of had my camera off. But yeah, so I'm quite lucky to work in a small company, and I'm kind of the right-hand man to the CTO, who is very business focused. So I'm kind of learning a lot. But
excellent.
My question, so that's kind of been very eye-opening for me. And I think I had the same question as Andrea, in that obviously, the CTO is dealing with the board level interactions at the moment, and how am I supposed to learn that interaction unless I've got a seat at the table? So at what point is it reasonable for to bring someone like me, a tech lead / engineering manager, into that level of discussion?
I mean, it's quite when you say at what point, do you mean At what company size? I'd love to understand a bit more the kind of context of your question, because it's quite difficult for me to answer at what point someone should bring. The usual point they bring someone like that into the meeting is when they're planning to leave. And they're building kind of that point too I meant earlier about join a very small company. When the CTO leaves, they promote you. Well, basically, it sounds like you're that person right now. So, if your CTO ever left, they'd probably be looking at you if they know that you've been working closely with this guy or gal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's kind of like the succession planning. But yeah. Should that not happen for another 2 or 3 years? I don't know how far his options are vested for the future.
Sure.
But I guess I guess it varies between a small company like mine where there's 50 people and a larger company. But I think for the wider audience, it'd be useful to know at what point, as a direct report or someone quite senior, can you ask for a seat at the table? Is it reasonable to expect that someone can just be pulled into those conversations unless there's a resignation on the table?
There are some specific situations where you might have access to the board. The board meetings are very formal things. There's certain processes people go through. I'd expect an invite maybe to an exec meeting rather than a board meeting. But in a board meeting, you would, for example, potentially be asked to come along to support the CTO in case that you need to answer some questions that the CTO doesn't know the answer to because they're too detailed. Like, for example, if there's been an incident or something has happened in your team, in your department, and the CTO gives a big helicopter view picture of what's happened, but the board has some specific questions, the CTO might decide to bring you along so you can answer those more detailed questions if they come up and they don't know the answer to those. And I would say, so again, part of making yourself a linchpin, becoming and asking the CTO constantly, actually, how can you make sure you're hitting the business goals? How can you, how is your, what's the business goal? What does the company want? Every time the CTO says to you, I need you to do this, kind of always ask questions to understand the bigger picture, the commercial aspects of those decisions, rather than just blindly going, oh, the CTO said this, rather than and going with it. And because then you see, you'll understand even more about what's happening. And frankly, the CTO feels threatened by those questions. It means they're way out of their depth and they're not a good CTO to copy anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Those are kind of the warning signs. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's useful. Thank you. I did have a second question.
Please, yeah.
So there's always a stigma about being too technical to non-technical people, but I feel like that wouldn't fly very well if you had a senior exec team who just threw their hands up in the air and I don't know anything about legal, or is there with a sea change of tech where execs are kind of just expected to at least have a base knowledge of technical detail now, where they at least understand basic concepts of a relational database or something like that? Or it just seems to be accepted that any kind of non-technical executive can just throw their hands up in the air and claim they don't understand.
Yeah, you have to. So here's the thing, right? When you go up into the boardroom, you discover you're the only person who understands technology. So for you to teach, because I've had this conversation a million times over with CTOs as well who are struggling with this. For the CTO to teach, one CTO said to me, that was a question he came to me with, when we started working together. How do I explain to this board how embedded software works? And I'm like, you don't. They do not need to know that. What the board care about is what's the business impact of this redesign. They don't care if it's done with embedded software or something else. They want to know what's the risk to the business, etc. So for the CTO to try and educate the board and expect them to learn databases and all of that is completely unrealistic. And honestly, I don't think it will ever happen. However, for the CTO to, this is the thing, right? When the CTO is able to communicate and translate technology into business terms, what does these databases mean to the business? Why are they so important, etc.? that's when the board gives them credibility and they feel that they're in the palms of the CTO. And that's what you want as a CTO. You want the board to feel like they trust you, that you know how to steer this ship. You don't expect them, you don't say, trust me, but they trust you because of how good you are at explaining to them why these databases are important from a business perspective. And this is the thing, I can tell you realistically, it's never going to happen. You try and go into a board meeting with some bankers. I mean, they couldn't care less. Like they're so, and the thing is, that's because they also don't need to, because if they move to another business, there's other technology that's happening. And they don't need to know that. What they're expert in is profit margins, or what their expertise in understanding how this market works. They don't need to understand technology that this market uses, because maybe different companies use different technologies to address the same market. So you see why it's not valuable for them to understand the details of technology. Does that make any sense? Please challenge me if it doesn't. Like, I really always welcome challenge. So if you think what I'm saying sounds, yeah, but what about this? Please feel free to say so. I'm never going to be offended by a question. I don't get offended by questions. So feel free to challenge me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, so what you're saying is the technology varies so much in each business that it's not quite as applicable as a, legal or something like that.
Yes.
It's a process-driven thing.
Yes.
Same everywhere.
For example, knowing profit margins, it's really important for every executive to understand how that's calculated. Understanding databases, Java, Rust, whatever. Maybe it works in this company, but we don't need that in the other company. And even if we do, it's not as important. We could, without it, the company doesn't collapse. And what I care about as an exec is my company going to be in risk? Like, what executives care about is risk, profit, and loss. That's pretty much it. Like they have, these two very basic things, like, are we making money? Are we exposing ourselves to risk? That's the core of everything they do. Everything else is just peanuts. It's just stuff, unnecessary evils, essentially.
Yeah, super. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellent questions, Reese. Thank you. Excellent questions.
Adelina, I do want to add something to that. I do feel like, I kind of agree with Reese. I think in this day and age, of course, depending on the company and the technology, there should be a certain level of baseline understanding across orgs of the lingo, maybe the technology, et cetera. And maybe the way to get ahead of this, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is to have like lunch and learns, right? Like, what are the core technologies? Or for the marketing team to have a lunch and learn and to talk about, hey, these are the metrics that we're looking on a weekly basis. And this is where you come in, and the KPIs flow into this. And then also from the tech team towards the other side as well, just so as to have like a baseline common knowledge across, not just from tech to business or business to tech.
I mean, I think cross-pollination of understanding each other's targets and challenges is extremely important, and it helps break down silos in companies. Lunch and learns for executives, when it comes to technology, I can't see them happening. Like, technologies, executives should know about cloud from the perspective of risk management and from the perspective of compliance if you're in a highly regulated industry. And this is actually on Monday, I'm invited to be the keynote of the CTOs in hedge funds conference, which is an invitation only event. Only CTOs they know are invited. And if anyone, you can't buy a ticket. You literally cannot buy a ticket to this thing. It's not even an option. You have to apply and justify where you're coming to this and where you want to come to this. And then they might invite you if you're lucky. They've asked me to do a keynote on a new legislation that's coming out, which is in the fintech sector, which is called EU DORA. And they're saying, my presentation is about how can you use EU DORA to build credibility with the board as a CTO. That's the presentation. And every conference, because I've been invited before to speak, every conference on the panels, I can tell the inexperienced CTOs a mile away, because they say things like, the board need to educate themselves on, what cloud is, and what this and what that. And it's like, no, you as a CTO need to explain to the board why they need to understand cloud from a business risk perspective. You can go to prison if we do not have a good cloud service, because we're not compliant with DORA, and one of the penalties is prison time if you blah, 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 if this and that happens. That's when you can help them. And what does cloud offer? Oh, but it's a secure thing and doing X, Y, and Z. So then, you see what I mean? Then they want to know, what the hell is this cloud thing? Rather than, or embedded systems. Why do we need embedded systems? But they don't need to know how that works. They just need to know what the implications are of cloud. So educating them, yes, but not in the way you think, I suppose, is my bottom line.
Adelina, all good things come to an end. I did have another question, but if you can maybe cap it at about a minute, if it's doable, let me know.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that we have enough time for closing thoughts.
Sure.
You've been offered, let's say hypothetically, you've been offered a CTO role, and you're trying to assess whether to take it or not. What are the key things that you should assess to make that decision, if you're lucky enough to be in that position?
Yeah. So I wrote actually a post about this a few weeks ago on LinkedIn and on Medium, and I'm going to try and remember off the top of my head what I said. But basically, there's slightly different points depending if it's a startup or a corporation. Because if it's a startup, you need to ask, what's the runway? Like, how much money do you have left? Can you pay my salary properly beyond the year? Like, what are your plans? So when it's a startup, you need to understand their financial plans and their vision. And if the company doesn't want to share those, frankly, that's a red flag.
Interesting. Okay.
If for example, again, if it's a startup, why are they hiring a CTO? What happened to the previous CTO? Were they fired? Why were they fired? How come they were fired? Is there going to be a handover? These are all red flags that if they say, oh yeah, we can't tell you about that, then why am I joining? Like, how would I know what am I getting into? And these are the kind of things that, for a startup, for a corporation, you need to understand what the success, and also for a startup as well, by the way, here's a common question. But what does success look like for this role at the 6 months or 1 year mark? If they don't have an answer for that, it sounds like you're probably being set up for failure. So therefore, part of your job will be to establish that right when you start. Having that assertiveness to tell them, I need to understand what success looks like for the business. And right now, I want to understand your expectations. If you don't know those expectations, this is a moving target. I actually pulled up a CEO on this the other day. But anyway, you said 1 minute, so I'm going to stop here.
I think, please go ahead and finish your closing thought. I think we have plenty.
Well, so the for example, this CEO kept saying to me, oh, my CTO is failing to deliver. I said, how are you measuring that he's failing to deliver? I said, because actually your CTO has worked insanely hard, and I just started pushing back actually for the CTO. And I told the CEO, you're changing the goalpost every 5 minutes. Once he gets to goalpost A, you move it to B. And I'm like, now he looks like he's failed because there's already a shortfall between A and B. You can't keep doing that. You're setting this guy up for failure constantly. But the CTO, if he had an executive mindset, he could have said that to him himself. But I could observe it from the outside. But the CTO, because he didn't know how to be an executive, he didn't know how to pull the CEO back up on this and tell him he's actually, and actually this is the thing. As an executive, you are showing the company how to respect you because you are actually proactively setting your targets rather than waiting for them to set targets for you. But the targets are, you need to understand what are they trying to achieve, and then you set your own targets in response to that. I'm going to stop here.
And that's setting you up yourself for success as well, and yourself in the role to build credibility. Absolutely agree. Thank you so much, Adelina. We can't thank you enough on behalf of Tech Interview Coaching. Andrea is on the call as well. He's comfortably muted, but everyone on the call, thank you so much for joining, guys. We had a good turnout, so we're very, very happy about this. Please feel free to join us on our LinkedIn wall for Adelina. Reach out to her directly. She shared her link in the chat window. Reach out to us for any sort of coaching needs, whether it's technical or non-technical, and we're more than happy to assist you. And happy CTOing in the future. Thank you again, Adelina. Is there anything else that you wanted to share?
No, I'm gonna put in the chat my my LinkedIn profile as well as the
amazing
interest list link again, just to make sure it's at the end in case people lost it earlier. But also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I've actually literally set up a private CTO, executive mindset CTO group on LinkedIn, which again, only people by invitation or people that are approved join, where people can speak freely about some of the issues they're having.
Amazing.
So
Amazing. So I recommend that people join that group as well. And I see that Andrea also shared the link to Tech Interview Coach. Either reach out to us there or directly on LinkedIn. And like Adelina, we're more than happy to continue to answer your questions. Thank you again, Adelina, and everyone else who was able to join, especially from the UK at such a tricky time.